Welcome to the BDI Empowers podcast, where experts simplify disability benefits so you don't waste years figuring them out. Now, get empowered.
This episode's sponsor is the Center for Psychological and Educational Assessments. They specialize in customized assessments for children with learning disorders like dyslexia, dysgraphia, autism spectrum disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, as well as intellectual disabilities and emotional challenges. Our speaker for this episode is Dana Smith, a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Georgia who holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Agnes Scott College, as well as Masters of Social Work from Kennesaw State University.
Hello there. Hello, everyone. A little bit more about me, if you guys would like to know. I grew up in Stone Mountain, and I think from a young age, I was just always interested in psychology and the way the mind works. And as I left undergrad at Agnes Scott, I went and joined a company who worked with, and maybe some of you are even familiar with it, Lindenwood Bell Learning Services in North Atlanta. And primarily their work was with young adults and children with learning diagnoses or processing disorders. This would go anywhere from autism, processing delays, ADHD, dyslexia, things like that. And I found myself over time, as we went through lesson plans and the targets of the reasons that they were there, noticing that as many struggles that they would have in school, it would always overlap into different ways that it would relate to communication with peers or self-esteem. I just felt myself pulled the longer I worked at that company to also go and get my clinical degree. And that is how I ended up, well, after many more years at BDI, but as a clinical therapist, based on my experience working with people in the autism community, in the neurodivergent community, and then a lot of teenagers who are heading from high school and above, and just the challenges that they face both emotionally and logistically of what comes next. All right, so a little overview of what we'll be going over today. It will be a little bit of the upcoming changes, what happens now, this period of transition from high school to young adulthood into whatever version of independence that would look like for you or your loved one. It's just filled with lots of positive moments. It's momentous for so many reasons. There's these specific milestones that are exciting to celebrate, but also at the same time, it can come with lots of uncertainty, anxiety, and just a struggle to find your place or like where you're going to find meaning, especially with a less structured schedule. So many parents have come to me both at BDI and in my placements before with the frustration that school from kindergarten to graduating high school is so wonderful for that structured schedule where you know who's going to be there, what's going to happen, and basically how your next few years are going to be planned out. And then as the school system ends, you realize all these questions come with what's going to happen now. I'm sure there are parents with loved ones of all ages because the transition period is not necessarily static. It could be starting anywhere from 14 years old, or a lot of experts recommend starting that transition to adulthood plan. So you could be coming in here as a parent of a 14-year-old, 16-year-old, or even a young adult who's 25, 30, who are in that transition period. I think it just lasts quite a few, like it's not just the 4 years of high school and the few years after. It's that 10 to 15 years of just where you go from adolescent to young adult to adult with whatever responsibilities that means you lead into. So for our guide for today, we'll talk, like I said, a little bit more about the what now questions, discussing recognizing anxiety, worry, and how they can get in the way of goals. We'll also discuss some specific strategies in responding to complex emotions, and then how to generate hope for the future when you're feeling overwhelmed, and caregiver support, because you and your well-being is such a big part of creating a thriving environment for yourself and your loved ones. So like I said, the big question, what now? Up until this point, you've been supported by a school system with regular school schedules, people who you're familiar with, and that same thing, you can get a routine, an environment, additional supports, accommodations as needed. Even if you're not completely pleased with it, you know what to expect from morning to afternoon, and whatever day it is or year it is, you know how many years are coming and what you can expect of each of these. Versus now, as you head into that transition out of high school and into young adulthood, just the questions of things like, how will your child spend their time? How will they be fostering joy? How will they be making connections and building a safe and independent life? And whether it's through my experience or research that I've done or feedback from people I'm meeting with now at BDI, I've gathered a bunch of markers that defines what a successful adulthood looks like. And it doesn't have to be a very static or formulaic independence across the board. It is whatever works for you and your family. But to me, what's important is this person Do they feel satisfied with life? Do they find meaning and purpose with what they do day to day? Do they have a social group that feels like the right fit and that they are able to get along with and enjoy? And then also from the young adult or adolescent side, we start to get questions of what will it look like if I want to start dating? How do I either build new friendships outside of high school or carry the ones from high school if we're now spread far and wide? And again, like what does adulthood look like for me on the day to day? Whether I'm living with family, with a service provider, independently, what does it look like now? And I will say that as all these questions come to a head, you might notice some tumultuous emotions or just bigger emotions than you're used to dealing with, or maybe even communication gets difficult. And the same way when it comes to filling out applications, whether your loved one is helping you or doing it on their own, maybe also just that moment of overwhelm where it gets hard to complete a task or go through your to-do list. Whereas before, all of these things might have been easy to them. You might start noticing behavior changes or mood changes that you can tell is not the norm. At some point, I want to partner very specifically with our other BDI programs to deliver specific resources. Whereas today, what I want to do instead of the resources is help with tools to address the emotions that come behind these questions. So what happens when your loved one is reaching a point of overwhelm with sadness, anger, irritability, stress, or anxiety? It starts affecting their self-esteem or their functioning. Okay, so part one, that's supporting your loved one through difficult emotions. But essentially what you might start to see with this increased level of emotions is what I call negative thinking patterns. You're just unable to get out of the same thought that leads to more negative thoughts. And you kind of get stuck in the rut of like, how can I think of things that are positive? You start assuming the worst case scenario versus either neutral or positive outcomes. And all of this gets stuck in the way of being able to have a flexible mind or hear feedback, finding problem-solving solutions, thinking positively, or just being open to trying new things or going new places. What I want to point to is when you start to notice a change in your loved one as they start to get overwhelmed, or if maybe it's not overwhelmed, they're just a little bit nervous and anxious about the future. And then these thoughts or feelings start to get in the way of them accomplishing their goals. So the difference between the two, so worry thoughts I would list as uncontrollable negative thoughts that are an attempt to problem solve something that might be negative. So for example, I'm worried that my friends won't make it to the event with me this afternoon and I'll have to go alone. So in this, thought is still open to problem solving solutions. Maybe this person, whether they're doing this independently in their head, they're talking through, okay, here's what I'll do if I am alone. Here is how I'll cope in the moment, versus an anxious thought is a little bit more intense, and it makes it a lot harder to have mental flexibility. So it's harder to get to a problem solving state, whether on their own or with support. So maybe instead there's an additional layer of stress with, I'm feeling really anxious right now and I don't think my friends are coming. I'll be alone and the event will be a disaster. So you've gone from feeling anxious to a little bit of worries to now the worst case scenario that it will be a disaster. And possibly this person might not make it to the event, will not stay throughout the whole event. But either way, it leads to a more challenging place of avoidance, thought paralysis, or just not being able to problem solve the issue that you're in. So like I said, the difference between these two is one, you are able to arrive to problem solving. The other one, it feels more of a paralysis, and that mental flexibility is not there as much. And like I said, both can get in the way of progress, communication, trying new things, generating hope, whereas anxiety might lead to needing more intervention because it shuts down more of your forward-moving goals. And before I move to the next one, I also want to add in here that both with worry thoughts and anxious thoughts, because the next part I'm going to talk about is when to seek support after. So with worry thoughts and anxious thoughts, I will say that everyday people can have them. No one is always having a great day or the best day, or they never have negative or unwanted emotions. So it's not necessarily that if you notice your loved one is having anxious thoughts or is struggling with anxiety, that it would lead directly to intervention. I just look at it as, while we all have ups and downs or stresses every now and then, what would separate it for me is if these day-to-day stresses then lead to a blocking of functioning. So is this person able to function in their daily lives and relationships with friends and families, service providers, like going to school, going to work, completing their day at day centers, in the community, at church, at the park, grocery shopping? You get the idea of whether they're able to function with all of these, or they find themselves with disruptions, whether they're being asked to leave a program or an event, or their strained relationships, whether with siblings, with parents, or just general ongoing conflicts with others. And these points of disruptions are a great time to start intervention, or even if you notice signs before, and to start intervention before. And that way we can begin problem solving with difficult emotions or a challenge communicating. Because the way I look at it is the behavior is normally what follows after there is a charged emotion or difficulty communication. The behavior is just telling us that there is something that we need to address internally versus the behavior is the problem. So these mood or behavior changes or an increase in worry thoughts or anxious thoughts would be signs of emotional distress that I would encourage you to seek, even if it's just a consult, just to be able to bounce your ideas and see if the changes that you're seeing, if there's any worries that this will lead to disruption, or this is something that you guys can address in the home. So like I said, a big part of what I want this to be is when to seek additional support, is with this talk is supporting stress management with your loved ones. So there could be, like I said, several things where it is just you guys problem solving at home and just you noticing a difference in your loved one can be the change in them being able to share what's on their mind. But if you found that as you're talking with your loved one and you're asking open-ended questions and what you're seeing is more of anxiety versus worry, it's not just manifesting cognitively, but also emotionally and physically as well. So if you think of the phrases, I'm going to be sick to my stomach, I got butterflies, my stomach did a backflip, my body went cold, I'm so anxious I think I might throw up. These are common phrases that can reveal something really important, that these emotions are so intense that your body is physically reacting as well. And in these instances, this is when someone is often trying their absolute best to overcome their anxiety. They're trying to get through the school day or interact in a new setting with new people, make an appointment or a phone call for setting up any kind of therapy appointment or doctor's appointment or even a dentist. I remember being younger and parents pushing me to make those first calls for independence and just the newness of it. But what I want you guys to look at is the difference between a worry thought and the anxiety, where it just kind of feels like your loved one is shutting down and it is difficult for them to move forward. Same thing goes for applying to a job or performing an interview. So some things you might notice is if there is, as well as an emotional response, also a physical response. And paralysis, it can mean this figuratively or literally. I'm sure some of you guys have felt like, I felt so anxious I couldn't move, that kind of thing. So not necessarily like you cannot walk or take steps, but it doesn't feel like you can go into the building or make that phone call or interact with somebody new. And so the two parts that we've highlighted are manifesting in the body physically versus a worry thought where you think about it whenever you're facing this new situation or you are thinking about the future, but you're able to talk it through with somebody or journal or be able to talk with friends and the worry decreases. Versus with anxiety, talking about the anxious thought or the thing that is stressing you. Maybe it might minimally lower the anxiety or not at all, but either way, those thoughts and the feelings in the body last for a very long time and then inhibit the ability to function normally. And again, this can mean many different things. You guys can think of the different ways this would apply to your family or to your loved one. But it's a matter of not just their mind shutting down, but their body and not being able to engage with flexible or positive thinking. And at best, this can affect their ability to focus. Like I said, when it's school or work or something new, like it's difficult to focus, perform their best, or retain important information. Whereas at worst, it can lead to avoidance, isolation, and inability to complete the milestones that are part of this transition period. All right, so like I said, we've talked through recognizing warning signs of emotional distress and noticing changes, hopefully before any level of disruption. I also want to talk about how you specifically can support your loved one at home when you're seeing these changes or noticing an increase in emotional displays. So often what anyone is looking for when they're struggling is validation. And I know this is a word that gets I feel like over the last 10, 15 years, there's quite a few mental health words that get thrown around as buzzwords, but I really want to sit in the meaning of validation. And what I want to do is make this scale as concrete as possible. And so I can't say this enough, and I say it to encourage you, I promise, is that validation does not equal endorsement or agreement. It doesn't necessarily have to be you changing your mind or pretending to agree to keep things positive with your loved one or signing off on a statement that you're not sure makes sense. Because again, I think just with parents, if you have a wealth of knowledge and you're trying to help guide your loved one as they transition into adulthood, there's lots of feedback and advice that you could give them that could be beneficial, or even lots of fact checking when their emotions get high. And I think there's definitely a time for that where you're able to offer advice and help them see maybe if their emotions are clouding something, that they add in more facts to make it feel like a more reasonable situation. So there's definitely time for that. But separately, what I want to talk about is almost the first step would be validating your loved one when they come to you with a large emotion or something that feels overwhelming, or like I said, uncertainty about the future. And so I've said what validation is not, but what I will say is that validation would be being able to recognize what your loved one is feeling and saying in the moment. And what you want to do, if they have mentioned the emotion, then you would just address the emotion that they've shared. If they haven't shared it, you can kind of guess and check in with them and ask, like, is that the emotion you're feeling? What I think I'm hearing is frustration or uncertainty or nervousness. Is that correct? And my hope is as we go through validation, you'll see how applicable this could be to many situations and how it'd be helpful with any of your loved ones, not just the ones transitioning to adulthood. So like I said, not endorsement, but instead recognizing and naming the emotion that the person is sharing and communicating that you understand their specific concern. And something that I think I learned maybe my first year out of grad school, and no matter what, I go back to it, and it is something that's so helpful because it's easy to remember, easy to access, also easy to share with your loved one. As if they hear a difference in your communication, you just let them know, well, I've been using the hug method. And the hug method, these 3 letters stand for I hear you, I understand you, and then give some feedback. So I'll give some examples of how to apply this. So one of my clients recently, a 25-year-old, he is in the job search process. And as you guys know, it's a taxing and long process with lots of effort and little immediate reward. And it can be hard even if you don't have a diagnosable disability or a need for accommodations. And then an added layer when you do have either or both of those. So this 25-year-old client, well supported by his family and his job coach, persistent in interviewing, but every now and then, reasonably, gets discouraged when he gets a no from a company where he felt really confident in an interview, or if he was excited about the specific job. Again, all really relatable concerns. And recently, in his frustration about an interview that didn't go his way, he was sharing this with his mom, and her response was, "I'm sure you did great, and you have another one next week. You got this." This is an encouraging, supportive response, and yet it led to an argument. So instead of the conversation ending and him feeling encouraged, it was instead a little bit of, "But Mom, I feel like you're not listening to me. You're not hearing me." And like many families, kind of that back and forth then grows into a bigger argument. When really at the start of it, one person was sharing concern and the other one was trying to be supportive. And what I noticed a lot in whether it's family sessions or individual sessions where someone is sharing with me is that it's rarely someone meant any level of ill intent. It's just a parent who is trying to get the right way of communicating. And so what I say whenever it comes to these arguments that happen frequently, especially when there is positive intention on both sides, is to just pause everything we're doing and just start at the beginning with the validating statement. Then later on, followed by the very helpful advice giving or support, but trying to have your first reaction being validation. What I've coached the family on is instead of starting with the encouragement or even emphasizing that you're proud of your child, you know they'll do better next time. If you find that this interaction ends in frustration, instead what you could do is start with the hug model. So, "Mom, I'm tired of this, and every time I work hard in an interview, I get a no. I can't stand this, and I just want to have a job and start making money." Do you start first with validation? "I hear you that you're tired of this and frustrated, that you're not getting the response that you want." So you have now addressed the feeling that he has shared and almost the direct statement of what he was saying. "I understand, and I completely agree that this process can be unpleasant." And the give feedback is a little bit more of you just knowing your loved one, what would be the most helpful. To me, I feel like if you ever feel overwhelmed at the moment and you're not sure what to say, and "I'm sorry" can be helpful, or "that can't feel good." So just, again, acknowledging that their emotion must be unpleasant. But in this specific situation, you could say, "It must be really hard to keep putting your best effort forward, especially when it feels like companies are not seeing that." So again, what can be difficult in this moment is that what you want to do is offer advice or problem solve, which is, again, from the best intention and exactly what a supportive parent would want to do. So I would say hold the problem solving and the offering advice. First respond in the hug format. And then as your loved one has shared more, you can just ask and be direct. "Hey, is it okay if I share some advice?" Or check in. "Do you want me to start problem solving, or do you want me to just hear you or listen to you?" And from there, you can kind of get their guidance of, "Actually, I just want you to hear me." And then you can keep listening, keep repeating the hug method as they share different statements about what they're experiencing. Or at some point, maybe they feel fully validated and then they're ready. And it's like, "Yes, I would like some problem solving," or "I'd like to hear your advice." I find that flipping that order of starting with validation and then offering advice leads to less conflict and increased communication on both sides, because that way you're able to hear a little bit more of what your loved one is sharing with you. So another one recently, I had a 15-year-old who shared that she was playing video games online and became frustrated because some players joined her virtual room and just pretty unprompted, they were off the bat really unkind, and it soured her gaming experience. So she left the game, took a break, and went and shared this experience with her mom. Mom, I was playing games online. Some people were really rude for no reason, and all of it happened so fast. And I was kind of thinking that for a second we'd be friends, but now I'm just sad. And mom's initial reaction, again, reasonable, makes sense, supportive, was for her to log off for the day and not play the game anymore. But the issue is mom went straight to problem solving, and instead what the daughter was looking for is validation. I will also add that there's some difficulty sometimes in not being sure what your child is asking for, but I want you to be open to direct communication. So asking them, is it okay if we start problem solving, or do you just want me to listen? And anything that they respond that is related to listening or that they want you to hear you is a key for you to know, okay, well then I'll go straight to the hug method and we'll check in with advice giving or problem solving later. So in this scenario, like I said, it went from, hey mom, this is what happened. Mom sharing, we'll just log off the game. And it led to an argument where, again, at the heart of it, both of them meant well and were just trying to connect and communicate. So instead, if we were to rewind, what I would say is when that loved one walks in the room, I'm sad, I was enjoying the game up until this point, use that hug model. I hear you, that them being rude made you sad. I absolutely understand why you'd feel that way. I'm sorry. Are you open to me problem solving, or do you want to tell me some more? And again, at that point, your loved one would either go straight to, actually, I just want to talk about it, or I just want to hug, or I want you to just sit with me. I want you to take a walk with me, or they are open to problem solving and they're open to hear some advice. This will apply to whichever age your child who is transitioning is, because really what we're looking for are these large emotions or feeling like it's difficult to communicate, anxiety, stress, worry, nervousness. And I want to say that one, direct communication, ensuring curiosity, if you ever notice behavior changes in your child, is the way to go. But also just any increases in anxiety, any markers of depression that you notice that can range from isolation, withdrawal, causing harm to themselves. And I know normally that what people think of is cutting, but it also can be reckless behaviors or things that are just can lead to unsafe environments. Intentionally unsafe driving, excessive drinking if your loved one is over 21, just things that you notice they're doing that is not, they're not caring for their safety, or no longer being interested in activities that used to be their passion, giving away belongings, that kind of thing, or even statements related to no longer wanting to be here. All of these could correlate directly with a suicidal thought. So in that event, I just encourage as much direct communication and open curiosity. They do not have to correlate at all, but just since there's a chance, I encourage you to ask questions where you feel comfortable. Something, if you were meeting with me, you probably would hear me say a few more times, is that validation is not endorsement or agreement, but it's a way that you are able to meet your loved one's emotion that they're trying to share. You're listening for the feeling that they are trying to communicate with you, and that's where you'd start. So I will say levels 1 and 2, those are the ones that are quick, easy, and you probably are already doing. So 1, just being present, listening, turning your attention to whoever's speaking and being mindful of body language and nonverbals. There's so many things happening all the time as a parent. There's responsibilities you're checking off, things you're thinking of. And so in the moment where you're noticing that your loved one is looking for validation, it's just a few extra intentional moments of turning the TV down or off or putting your phone away, turning to them directly. At that point, you haven't even had to say anything. You're just being present. And if you are doing that already, you are validating your child. I know that at times it can feel overwhelming with all the steps to do, but if you are doing level 1, you are already being validating. And level 2, it pretty much matches the hug model. So you're able to reflect phrases that they have said back to them. You're checking for if you got it right. And again, in that moment, you're avoiding advice giving or explaining logic. And even, like I said, the sage advice of a parent. You have all this information to give your child, especially when they're sharing concerns about transitioning to adulthood. So I would just say, hold it until you have been able to check in with them and they're open to getting some advice or hearing out something I call it check the facts. If they're experiencing a big emotion, they're not sure if they should trust their emotion or what they're seeing. So same thing, saving all those things, coping skills, logic, reasoning for at the end when they're ready for it. And now for the higher levels of validation, those take a little bit more, I would say, thought and practice. Again, you probably are already doing all of them, but if you're thinking to yourself that you now want to start practicing intentionally, those are the ones that I like to think of. Maybe you just do one at a time, because that's another thing. They do not have to all happen at once, and you do not have to do all 6 levels in order for this to be a validating experience. I would just say that the higher you go in the level, normally the more intense emotion your loved one is communicating. So if it's just a passing, I'm kind of bummed about a review I got at work, or a friend who didn't answer my text, or a grade I got at school, it could be just using that 1 and 2, and then you check in with your loved one and they're feeling okay. Or maybe it's something more intense and they're really worried about the future. They're starting to feel the weight of what it looks like to live independently or be on their own, or have to start applying to jobs, living farther away from you, that kind of thing. So maybe you would lean into the validations 4, 5, or 6. And I'm going to do an example where we go through all 6 levels of validation. But again, I want to emphasize that you do not have to do all 6 to be communicating validation. Either 1 or 2 or just a few of them, and you are already doing something positive. So let's say your loved one comes home and says that there's someone I have a crush on at, and again, insert whatever works for your loved one and their schedule, school, day center, a program, work. There's someone I have a crush on and they're really nice to me and I know that we're friends. And today I asked them to sit with me at lunch and they said no. And now I don't know what to think. I'm just kind of all over the place. So again, some response that would make perfect sense, but I would still avoid at the first step. If your goal is just to validate, is responses like, are you sure that you're friends? Which again is a reasonable way of checking in. Maybe they just wanted to sit somewhere else, or that's okay. You have plenty of other friends and people that you could have a crush on. Those are ones that you would avoid. And instead, a validating response could be, I hear you that you might be feeling confused because you thought the two of you were friends. It's hard not to be on the same page as someone, especially when you have a crush on them. And now you might add more as you lead into the higher levels of validation. So level 3, you're putting yourself in their shoes and checking in for accuracy. Are you worried that you misread the signals and now you're not sure how this person feels about you? Level 4, acknowledge some possible causes, some things that you know about your loved one that would make this make sense. Maybe last week you mentioned that sometimes you feel scared that you won't ever find someone that likes you back. So now you've added in an important history that would be making sense for how they feel. And then say out loud to them that you understand what they're feeling and that it makes sense in light of what's happening. Being a teenager and being someone who's neurodivergent, it makes sense that you might have those fears because you're at an uncertain point in your life. Thinking of the future can be really overwhelming, and sometimes people around you can misunderstand the way you communicate. And that level 6, which sometimes can be either the breakthrough, the really hard part, the one that you practice at, and is easier if you are able to feel non-defensive. And we're all people. I think it depends on the issue your loved one is bringing to you. It can be easier or harder to do this. So when you're able to reach level 6, where it's just really radical genuineness and being open and hearing them out, you might say something like, I know it must be really hard to worry that you won't have a high school experience like your siblings or like some of your friends. There's so many things about getting older that are overwhelming, but I'm here to listen to all of your worries. At this point, maybe based on their reaction, you could say, is it okay if I offer you some advice? Because I'd really love to remind you about some of your best qualities and why I can see a crush liking you back. So now with these responses, you have hit each point of the 6 levels of validation, and more, especially as the parent. Also importantly, you have now opened the door for your loved one to share more of their thoughts. Because sometimes it can be hard if you feel invalidated, you're not sure where to go next, and you kind of just end the interaction. But with this, you've opened up several conversations and you can hear their point of view on several things. And I just think communication flows and happens in much deeper levels when you're able to both feel non-defensive. If you ever feel like you're in the middle of validating and you want to take a break, my recommendation is to, again, be as open and honest with your loved one as you can. So being able to say, let's both take a drink of water and come back to this where we can feel a little more unbiased talking about this. And again, if in this interaction that I just listed, you'd be gauging your loved one's reactions, and you're welcome to decide if it would make sense to stop at a level 3 or a level 5 and instead just make the conversation a little bit more free-flowing where you're just talking instead of focusing on validating. But you can kind of gauge your loved one's emotional response. So you can kind of know if it's more validation they need, or you could slide into something else. Bringing it around more specifically to the ins and outs of the transition period. And I know these are all things probably you've most likely already planned for and been discussing for a long time, making sure that your loved one is headed for a setup that has community inclusion, recreational, artistic programs, or employment or volunteer settings that match with their strengths and their individuality. Building meaningful skills, whether it's budgeting, household management, internet safety, making connections, talking to others, and then also honoring and exploring personal interests. So it's likely that you have already checked all these things off or are working on incorporating them into your loved one's transition to adulthood. If your loved one is coming to treatment with me, I'm exploring their level of satisfaction and inclusion with all of these things because I think it's so important. Same thing when I do treatment plans or I build goals. I want to include your personal interests, hobbies that spark joy, topics that you can't help but get excited about and share. I think it's important to have all of these interwoven into therapy. That way, the more individualized the treatment plan is and the more we talk about and incorporate your goals, the more invested you're going to be and the better results you're going to get, faster and longer lasting. It's so important to make sure that you are also, as much as you give to your loved one, that you're also able to pour back into yourself. And of course, there's so many things, so many constraints, time, money, just energy in general, to being able to truly check out and pour back into yourself. Studies show that there's just more stress and depression and anxiety that occurs in caregiver populations than the general population. And some things that I'm sure you guys have already discussed, and we've done it and talked about it in a few different webinars, but getting support from where you can and respite where you can as well. And if there are time and financial constraints, what I would say, if there's nothing else you can do, is to every now and then take a scheduled mini vacation. And this could be walking outside for 15 minutes or laying out in the sun for 5 minutes, just something where you are intentionally checking out and pouring back into yourself. Reading a book, taking a walk, just calling a friend that you haven't spoken with for 20, 30 minutes, whatever you can do that is specifically pouring back into yourself with the time and energy that you have.
This was BDI Empowers, your guide to independent living. Join us again next month to learn more about simplifying disability benefits.